Well, good day, my friends. It's your old pal Jordan the Lion. We are headed through the, kind of the river border of Kentucky and Ohio today. Daze with Jordan the Lion begins now. He's, of course, resting. Specifically, we are on the Kentucky side of the water. This says, "Welcome to Augusta, birthplace of Heather Renee French Miss America 2000. There's a historic house here in Augusta that I want to share with you. I wanted to stop in Augusta today because there's a historic house that is also a museum. Unfortunately, the museum part of it is only open on Fridays and Saturdays from 9 a.m. till 3 p.m. and I'm here on a Tuesday. So it won't be open today, but this house is called the Rosemary Clooney house. You see, Rosemary grew up in nearby Maysville, Kentucky, which is actually right down the road, and that's also where she's buried. But in 1980, she came back and was living in this house as her retreat from Hollywood. So this big white house right here is the one. See, Rosemary had kind of a, I would say kind of a rough childhood because her parents didn't get along at all. And her father especially had a drinking problem, so her parents never really, other than when they were conceiving children, ever spent really any time together, because when they were together, they fought. So Rosemary was the oldest, and then 3 years younger than her was her sister Betty, and then 6 years younger was brother Nick, and they were an extremely close-knit family. You can see here they have a little sign that says the Rosemary Clooney house. And it says that the proprietors are Steve and Heather French Henry. So that name, that was Miss America 2000. This house that Rosemary would stay in since 1980, after her death, all of her kids and nephews and everybody got together and talked to the owners here about turning it into a museum. So unfortunately, like I said, the museum is not open, but if you come anytime other than right now, I noticed they put online that as of November 6th, the collection is going to be on loan in Omaha, but normally they have the largest white Christmas collection anywhere, including her costumes and stuff like that. So this was kind of made possible with both Miss America of 2000 and the family of Rosemary Clooney. So if you're ever passing through Augusta, definitely come check out the Rosemary Clooney house. This is the view from her front yard. Look at this, she has a ferry that goes across the street, so you can definitely tell why she would love this. And if you're talking 1980, that was part of those years where she was trying to make her comeback, her slow comeback. She had retired basically when Robert Kennedy was assassinated. She had a mental breakdown, checked herself into an insane asylum basically, and vowed to not perform anymore. Then it was like 10 years later that she finally started performing again, but it took like 10 years for fans to care. So we're gonna go ahead and head off to Maysville and see what we can find there. I know she's buried there, and I believe the old Russell Theater that has kind of a cool story that she and her siblings used to go to is still there. I'll definitely make it a point to come back and check out the collection and when it returns and when the place is open, obviously. Just outside Maysville, where she grew up. Oh wow, this is old school. St. Patrick's Cemetery. Wow, this is really nice. So if you come here looking for Rosemary, look for the 2 trees over by where the hill starts to descend. Only 2 trees over there. I can see her right there. I mentioned that she grew up in this town and her parents didn't get along. also means she didn't really have a stable home. Her and her two siblings, they were super close, but they said they were kind of always, the parents were separated, so they were always living in different places, a lot of times with the grandma, and this wasn't a real good environment. So in 1940, when Rosemary was 12, her mother and father divorced, and her mother took Nick, who was 6 years younger, took him to California and told Rosemary and her sister Betty that she would come back and take them with her, bring them to California, and she never did. Nick would say he was 10 years old when they came back to this town, and he said by that point Rosemary and Betty weren't singing professionally yet, but they had done stuff at school and people knew how good of singers they were. It wasn't just people in the family, because people in the family always knew that Rosemary had an amazing voice that was going to take her to somehow have a career in music. But he said when he came back, they were really, really good, the two sisters singing together. Now what's horribly sad is that Rosemary would say that her and Betty would have to live with their father, and that their father had dried out and wasn't drinking for some time until, she said, VJ Day. And she said VJ Day came and he didn't come home from work. And then he didn't come home the next day or the next day, and she said they kind of figured after a week he wasn't coming back. But they were so good at singing, they had made their name and got an audition for WLW in Cincinnati. WLW to this day is still around and was responsible for giving Doris Day her start, Andy Williams, people like that. And so Rosemary and her sister Betty went, auditioned, and Rosemary said, we did pretty good. And then they just kept having more people come in, like different people come in to watch us. And before we knew it, we were offered $20 a piece to be on the radio. So Rosemary and Betty ended up moving in with their aunt, who lived closer to Cincinnati where the broadcasts were. And my grandpa was telling me that he and my grandma actually saw Rosemary and Betty several times at dances. They used to like to go out and see big bands, and he said he saw them several times. He couldn't remember who the leader was that they were with. I think it was probably Tony Pastor. But he said several years later, when Rosemary was married, that he and my grandma also saw them at Memorial Hall performing together. So Rosemary and Betty were actually pretty young when you think about it. They got this gig in like 1943, 44, so they were just teenagers. But the famous Barney Rapp, who I had mentioned if you watched my vlog on Doris Day, he was the man that hired Doris Day for his club and changed her name to Doris Day. Well, you know, Tony Pastor, a band leader, was coming through and contacted Barney and said, Barney, do you know a girl that I can hire to become my new singer? I'm about to lose my singer. And he said, well, I don't know a girl, but I know two girls. And put him in touch with Rosemary and Betty Clooney. They auditioned and they were both hired to go on the road as the singer of Tony Pastor's big band.
When a certain gentleman arrived from Rome, she wore the dress and I stayed home.
Which they did for several years. In fact, they started, their very first show was in Atlantic City, opening for the horse, the diving horse. But Rosemary said that after a couple of years, they were offered, and they started performing during this time. They met a young Tony Bennett. Tony Bennett was on the same scene and was getting booked for the same things as them. They said eventually they got a record deal.
I'm here to keep my eye on her, sharing every little thing that we are wearing.
And when they got the record deal, that's around the time that Betty said, I don't think I really want to do this anymore. Rosemary had said, I would have never left the group because it was my sister. But when Betty said she didn't want to perform anymore, I knew that I still wanted to perform, and I had a record contract, so.
Close your eyes and concentrate and dream for all you're worth. You will feel terrific when you get back down to earth.
Like I said, Tony Bennett, they were both actually signed to Columbia making records, and they had the same man picking out the music for them, and he got them a radio show, and he was the one that was actually picking out all of Rosemary's hits. For the first couple of years, she had like 7 top 10 hits because of him, and one of those was Mambo Italiano, which is one of my favorites of Rosemary Clooney's.
Calabrese, do the mambo like a crazy. Well, I ain't mambo. Don't want to tell and that I ain't mambo. No more than
Rosemary's career took off, and she actually saw Jose Ferrer performing. Even though he was married, they both were smitten with each other, and I think he was working on his second wife even then. He's kind of known for being a ladies' man. They fell in love, and he divorced his wife, and they decided to get married. And all of Rosemary's friends and family and everybody said they really didn't think it was a good idea at the time, because they said Jose really, well, she called him Joe, said he really, was a big womanizer and had no bones about letting people know that he wasn't going to change. So kind of surprised when Rosemary would decide to pick that as her husband, or him as her husband. But they ended up having 5 children, some of them that we very familiar with because they became actors. And then, of course, as you can imagine, Rosemary found out the worst and decided to separate from Jose. And during that time, she fell in love with her band leader, the guy that was kind of helping her make records at the time, Nelson Riddle. She had a lot of hits with Nelson Riddle. When she left Columbia, part of the reason was because she was performing in Vegas one night, and Paramount came and saw her and offered her a screen test. And when they saw her screen test, they wanted to put her in movies. So she started doing movies during that time, and one of them being the famous White Christmas. That's probably like one of the most famous Christmas movies of all time, where she developed a lifelong friendship with Bing Crosby in that movie.
It's incredible.
Sisters, sisters, there were never such devoted sisters. 2 different faces, but in tight places, we think and we act as one. Those who've seen us, Lord help the mister who comes between me and my sister.
Relationship with Nelson was ending. She said she was going through a really rough time in her life at that point. She was basically, she said, just doing prescribed drugs all the time, drinking a lot. She couldn't sing as well. She said her music at that time even reflected that. It was just a rough time in her life, but she started performing again, tried to clean things up, and then, like I mentioned earlier, Bobby Kennedy was assassinated, and she was friends with Bobby Kennedy and, had performed for Bobby Kennedy. So it really hit her hard, and she kind of fell out of the limelight, decided that she wanted to retire, and said it was because she wanted to take care of her family. But she said she checked herself into Cedars of Lebanon Hospital in Los Angeles until she started feeling right again. But it wasn't until Merv Griffin contacted her before she was ready to come back to the main stage. She had basically kind of decided she was thinking about it before then, and her brother Nick had a show in Cincinnati. So she had come and made an appearance on Nick's show just to kind of get her feet wet again. And her sister Betty came and performed with them. But unfortunately, Betty ended up passing away not too long after that. So Rosemary did eventually go back to performing, and she would start doing clubs, but people didn't really seem to care at first. And she said she'd perform at Holiday Inns, and people would come up to her and say, "I can't believe you're performing here. Like, you deserve so much better than this." And she said, I would just think to myself, yeah, well, you came here to see me, so it can't be that bad. But eventually, after years of performing, she did end up marrying the love of her life. I was kind of curious. I didn't look online before, but I was curious if he would be buried out here with her. It doesn't look like He was, but Dante DePaulo, they were, you know, they were a great couple, and she did have that love in her life, and they, you know, they were, if you ever find interviews with them, they're quite a riot together. But what an unbelievable voice. Hey You with the Stars in Your Eyes. I mean, just absolutely amazing. We know Nick's son is George Clooney. So when we were in Augusta, George used to spend time in Augusta. Now I want to go into Maysville, the town that she grew up in, and I want to tell you this really cool story about one of her returns when she came back as a superstar. Rest in peace, Miss Clooney. Now we're coming into Maysville. Beautiful. Wow. Thought I would pop over here because the white section of this building was where Grandma Guilfoyle lived. That was Rosemary's grandma, so they would stay there when their parents were fighting and stuff. This white part. So right here is the Russell Theater, and this was kind of a big deal because this is where Rosemary, Betty, and Nick used to come see movies and things like that when they were growing up. And when Rosemary had a movie called The Stars Are Singing that came out, I think it was in 1953, they had a parade in her honor, and she came back to the town and everything and participated in it. And she said that what happened was when the parade was about to start, her grandma didn't come to the parade. And she said, I just absolutely refused to have this without her. So we went to her house and said, come on, you got to come too. So they hustled me over to her house in a cop car covered with a blanket so nobody would see me. And we picked her up and brought her to the premiere of the movie that they had here. They do have a plaque over here. Let's take a look. It said 20,000 people came out to see her when they had this premiere. And take a look. What do you guess is right there? Star in her honor. Stars Are Singing, 1953. Rosemary Clooney. So there's the front entrance and just a little historical plaque. And you can see right here, they still do show movies. Looks like from September up until Christmas. And you can imagine what they show right around Christmas time. White Christmas. And I just noticed if you come over to the right side of the theater, there's this. Born in Maysville, Rosemary Clooney topped the charts with Come On to My House in 1951. Other hits include This Old House and Hey There. Her first film, The Stars Are Singing, premiered at Maysville Russell Theater, 1953. She co-starred with Bing Crosby in the 1954 classic film White Christmas. And there's something on the other side. Throughout a singing and acting career that spanned 6 decades, the acclaimed girl singer remained connected to her hometown. In 1999, Rosie launched the Rosemary Clooney Music Festival in Maysville, the site of her birth, marriage, and final resting place. Pretty cool. I'm so glad we stopped here. Well, my friends, we're gonna call it a day. Thank you all for watching. I hope you enjoyed our vlog on the great life of Rosemary Clooney. If you've never seen her show, The Rosemary Clooney Show, go find it on YouTube. Thank you for watching. Have a great night and goodbye.